Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, council members, city officials, and streaming audience. I would like to welcome everyone to our January 23rd City Council meeting. We have 6 items on our agenda this evening. We're meeting here in chambers with public attendance and streaming live on YouTube. Moving forward, if you would, Ms. Moss, please continue with the roll call of our members.
Greg Phillips.
Here.
Payne. Nickerson.
Here.
Farrow. Henderson.
Here.
Brown.
Here.
Preston.
Here.
Greg Phillips, or Anthony Phillips, I'm sorry.
Here.
Prohl.
Do we have a motion to excuse Ms. Payne and Mr. Farrow for tonight's meeting? Motion by Ms. Henderson, seconded by Mr. Greg Phillips. Roll call on the motion to excuse Mr. Farrow and Ms. Payne.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Nickerson.
Yes.
Henderson.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Motion is passed. At this time, would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you. The minutes of the previous meeting have been distributed for review. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes at this time? If not, do I have a motion to accept the minutes as they are? Motion by Ms. Preston, seconded by Mr. Brown. Roll call on the motion to accept the minutes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Henderson.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Nickerson.
Yes.
The minutes have been accepted. We'll now move to reports of our committees. We'll begin with Community Affairs Committee. Mr. Greg Phillips.
Thank you, President Geringer. Community Affairs does not have any agenda items on this evening's agenda. However, we did hold at 6:30 a committee meeting. It is actually a assignment 08322, so it is from last year, and it is it's actually a second committee meeting concerning the issue around trap, neuter, or spay and release of cats to try and see if we can lend a hand in helping the feline issue in the city of Chiillicothe. And so we had just kind of some issues concerning the Humane Society's involvement in this since the original letter to the president of council had listed the Ross County Humane Society several times on there, really in more of a consulting role. But after further discussion this evening, Ms. Snowden is now 501c3 and is able to receive their own funds. And really, we're going to have that ordinance reassigned or rewritten so it can just deal with her 501c3 cats and company. The Humane Society, of course, is always glad to lend a hand, but it will actually go through cats and company. So we are interested to see how this may help some of the problems with feral cats, with roaming cats, things like that. And so we're going to be rewriting that. We will have to, for new legislation purposes, we'll hold another committee meeting on that new old piece of legislation, and then hopefully get that on an agenda as soon as possible. And that's all I have to report. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving next to Human Resources. In the absence of Ms. Payne, do any of the Human Resource Committee members have items to report? Mr. Brown.
Thank you. Human Resources is one item on the agenda tonight. In her absence, Councilperson Payne asked me to brief the public on assignment 23008, which is now item 6 on tonight's agenda. First, on behalf of the Human Resources Committee, I wanted to acknowledge that this piece of legislation was not given a proper committee meeting, or at least public hearing. But the Human Resources Committee wants to let everyone know we think that is a vital part of this legislative process. But nonetheless, the urgency of the matter, in accordance to Rule 7A of the Council Code, Chairperson Payne did ask for that item to be placed on this week's agenda so that we can meet the obligation our committee has to staff our city. So with that in mind, I'll just give a quick overview of that ordinance. It's authorizing the hiring of a temporary law director clerk in the law director's office and declaring an emergency. The law director's office was informed of an unforeseen extension to the sitting clerk's medical leave and will need our authorization to hire a temporary replacement. Some important notes. Section 2, it's about appropriating $5,000 for expenses relating to the temporary employment of the law director clerk. That'll go from unappropriated general fund. That $5,000 will go to general fund to the law director's salaries. The temporary law director clerk shall work no more than 20 hours per week and not to exceed a period of 12 weeks. The rate of pay for that will be $16.69 per hour and shall provide only those fringe benefits required by law. It is our committee's understanding that the law office has cleared those funds as available from the auditor's office. So because of the importance of a fully functioning law office in our city, at the appropriate time, I will be asking council to waive the 3-read rule so that we can allow the law office to staff this position immediately. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Moving now to the Development Committee, Ms. Nickerson.
Thank you, President Geringer. Development has nothing on the agenda. However, we did have a committee meeting prior to this meeting and to discuss street closures and updating that ordinance that hasn't been updated in a long time. So that will be, I'll be sending that over to the law director shortly, very soon. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving to the Finance Committee, Mr. Tony Phillips.
Thank you, Council President. Finance Committee has two things tonight, both a first read. One is number 4 on tonight's agenda. It is an ordinance appropriating $1,764,483.59 for the purpose of continuing the handling of brought forward purchase orders from the year 2022 and other brought forward amounts to be put on the books of the City of Chiillicothe, Ohio for the year ending December 31st, 2023, and declaring an emergency. At the appropriate time, I will be asking Council to join with me in waiving the 3-read rule. I'll also be making a motion to amend Section 1 in there. The original document that was going to be presented tonight had the wrong date, and it was 2021. It should be 2022, so the motion will reflect that change at the appropriate time. Our second item tonight is a first read. It's number 5 on the agenda. It's an ordinance reappropriating funds that were appropriated in 2022 budget and not yet spent or encumbered for special projects or purchases at the end of the 2022, and also declaring an emergency. And at the appropriate time, I will be I'll be making a motion to waive the 3-read rule as well on that. And that's all that Finance has. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving now to Parks and Recreation, Ms. Henderson.
Thank you, President Geringer. Parks, Recreation, and Tourism has one item on tonight's agenda, which is item 2, a first read for street closures for the Buck 50 Inc. On 2nd Street, which will take place April 20th through 22nd. A couple quick announcements. The Chiillicothe Tree Commission has recently developed a form for citizen requests for pruning, planting, and removal of trees. It is quite user-friendly. I'm also very pleased to announce the return of a longtime Tree Commission volunteer, Mr. Whitey Coates, along with his daughter and son-in-law, Becky and Greg McKeever. The Parks and Recreation Department approved the 2023 Leprechaun Chase 5K for March 18, and the city is partnering this year with the YMCA to hold youth league basketball in the court at the Armory. And they're also discussing locations and updates for the skate park, adding pickleball courts, and having further discussion on a pump track location. And then I'd like to make a committee announcement for our next regularly scheduled meeting, which would be Monday, February 13th at 6:30 p.m. For the following assignments. Developing a temporary nature preserve on the Tiffin property, street closures for the Feast of the Flowering Moon, art in the streets, sand in the streets, the Rudolph Run 5K, and Chili Fest. And that is all I have at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Now moving to the Safety Service Committee with Ms. Preston.
Thank you, President Geringer. Safety Service has 2 items on the agenda tonight. The first one is an ordinance amending Section 521.17A titled Maximum Height of Grass and Weeds of Codified Ordinances of the City of Chiillicothe and declaring an emergency. This is to bring into line with another ordinance that was passed some time ago and had been talked about since last spring. So this is another area that we found talked about the height of grass. So we're just bringing it in line with the other ordinance. And we also have number 3, an ordinance amending Section 151.02 of the Codified Ordinance of the City of Chiillicothe, Ohio, titled Court Personnel. We've had a couple meetings on this, and Judge Street requested emergency language on that, and it is not added to this. So at the appropriate time, I would like to make an amendment to add emergency language to this item. And that is all that I have this evening. Thank you.
Next, moving to Engineering and City Services. In the absence of Mr. Farrow, do any members from those committees have items to report? And finally, our Utilities Committee with Mr. Prohl.
The Utilities Committee has no items on tonight's agenda. I would like to announce a Utilities Committee meeting on January 30th at 6:30 p.m. here in Council Chambers. The purpose will be to talk about the Water Rate Review Board recommendations and foregoing those in light of the legislation that we passed to go along with increases for the construction of a new facility. We were originally going to meet on this last Monday, but the meeting had to be canceled, so we were rescheduling for next Monday, January 30th at 6:30. Thanks a lot.
From there, we move to our reports from officials. Our mayor, Mr. Luke Feeney.
Thank you, President Geringer. Just a few comments on tonight's pending legislation. I'd like to offer my support, particularly in items 4, 5, and 6. Items 4 and 5, of course, are amounts that were committed to last year or the year before, in some cases. Bringing forward those purchase orders, continue to be able to pay our vendors and pay our commitments. So items 4 and 5, I'd ask for your favorable vote. And item 6, just chiming in on this one. When staffing gets low in some of these departments, especially in departments when there's not many people to begin with, it can be very difficult to complete some of the work necessary. So I'd just offer my support for that item, number 6. Just want to comment on a question that was raised recently regarding residency requirements, specifically related to Safety Service Director. I've consulted with the law director, and she's confirmed we're in compliance with the law. And then just a couple updates on things that were put into motion last year and I have updates for. Much to the joy and celebration of our city administration building, our furnace is operational again. If you've been to the city building recently, you see a massive tube that pumps temporary heat to the building. We have permanent heat again. And I will add this, we were told that when all the parts were shipped for the boiler, one part was missing. It was some sort of safety valve and the local contractor, the part didn't come from the manufacturer like it was supposed to. All the parts arrived. We got to the end, and this part was missing. So the manufacturer was calling all of its suppliers across the country. Our local contractor was calling across the country trying to find it. And they paused and thought to look at a local plumbing supply company who happened to have the exact piece in stock on the shelf. They drove about 2 blocks, went and picked it up and installed it. So just a little plug to shop local. And finally, council also approved some much needed painting, stripping of some deteriorating walls and painting in the city building. That is ongoing. It makes it a challenge to get to the second and third floors. So just letting you know that if you come into the city building, second and third floors are accessible by elevator only, but it's already making a big difference. And finally, some exciting news. I want to congratulate Ms. Tatiana Myers on her graduation from the Ohio State Highway Patrol Academy last week. She's already a city employee, and upon her successful passing of her APATA test, she will then become a new city Chiillicothe police officer. So congratulations to Ms. Myers. And with that, I will conclude my report.
Thank you. We'll now move on to our auditor, Mrs. Bettnagel.
I have 2 items on the agenda tonight, number 4 and number 5. Item number 4, I did bring in, I carried in a correct ordinance. Section 1 had the date originally sent out of 2021. That needed to be 2022. Items number 4 and 5, as the mayor, Mr. Phillips, said, those are to pay for commitments that were that were made in 2022. So I asked for your vote to waive the 3 read roll on that so we can get some vendors paid. I believe we have a garbage truck that's ready to be picked up. So as soon as we get this passed, we can go get that. And then my office is currently working on year end. We're getting close. I think we have 1 more entry to make. And as soon as we get that done, I will come in and do a review of last year's finances. And then that concludes my report.
Thank you. Next to the law director, Ms. Villarreal.
Thank you. As you heard this evening, item number 6 is for our office. One of our employees, the clerk, is out. She had to have a medical procedure done. She's out, unfortunately going to be out longer than everybody anticipated. She is in charge of a lot of the saving videos, processing the video evidence, distributing them to all 4 of the assistant law directors, as well as data entry and filing. And without her, it's been a hardship. Everybody's trying to keep up, but we're really struggling. So that's why that's on there. And we appreciate your support in that. And that's my report.
Thank you. We'll now move on to audience participation. Council Rule 22 does limit each speaker to a 5-minute presentation, total limitation of 15 minutes per any single subject. If you get to the point where you're getting close to 1 minute left, I'll try to indicate to you to summarize your presentation. Anyone who wishes to speak, we do need for our records your name and address.
Oh, there it is. John Thacker. My address is 990 Columbus Street, apartment 307, Chiillicothe. 2 things. I wanted to say thank you to the city representative on the Ross County Health District Board, who is now, I guess, officially no longer one of the board members because she has another position. And it was announced at their meeting last Wednesday, so it's official, I believe. So I'm not, I think, breaking news here. So the city will have another appointment to that board. And my hope is that it might take a little less time than the last 2. We'll see, I guess. At any rate, it turns out that Dr. Mojado is also my personal physician, so I have a vested interest in saying thank you to her for all the work that she's done, because let's be honest, she has a lot to work with here, so it was pretty tough for her. The second item is that I did want to, you know what, I've forgotten the second item now. I apologize. It may come back to me here in a moment. I do recall that you said at the last meeting that you had some question as to the ordinances being designated as declared as an emergency. I know that there's probably a technical reason for that. I'm not real clear what that is. Perhaps the law director would know. 4 of the 6 items on tonight's agenda is including that phraseology. It has nothing, I think, to do with the fact that, you know, it requires 1, 2, or 3 reads. It must be something else. Perhaps the law director could explain.
I can tell you that we do not make those decisions. We simply draft up what comes to us, and that's council's department there.
Okay.
So we don't have any input as to what's being drafted or why.
Okay.
The emergency language is usually put in place when you need that ordinance to take effect immediately after passage.
Okay.
Normally, things that would require an emergency legislation are things that, like purchasing, paying bills, because they would be required to be done instead of waiting 30 days after to take effect. You'd want them to take effect immediately.
Okay.
So things that change laws might not include the emergency language because it would allow 30 days to publicize that and get it out there, or if there was any type of referendum type situation. But things that deal with paying bills or accepting money generally have the emergency language.
Okay, well, thank you. That makes sense.
Okay, thanks.
I did remember the other one. If I should be stepping on anybody's toes here, the agenda is mailed out to an email chain of which I am part. It is not very often included in the Facebook page for the City Council. And there may be a reason for that. I'm not sure what it is. It might be more widely available to people who might be interested if it were. And I would just ask that perhaps that be reinstated, because I believe it was and has been on an intermittent basis included. So that's the last thing. Thank you. Somebody else speaking?
Thank you. David White, 179 Shore Street. I've got some prepared remarks in regard to proposal on tonight's agenda. Please allow me to provide the following comments regarding the proposal to reduce the maximum height of grass and weeds from 12 inches to 6 inches. Initially, I would indicate that the City of Chiillicothe has no legitimate interest in regulating the height of grass or what has been defined as noxious weeds or harmful weeds or vines in Section 521.13 of the revised ordinance of the City of Chiillicothe, Ohio. That ordinance defines a noxious or harmful weed to include ragweeds, daisies, goldenrod, burdock, yellow dock, dandelions, thistles, wild carrot, and any other weed or vine which exhales offensive or noxious odors, or from which there is carried by the wind any injurious, offensive, or annoying pollen, dust, seed, or particles, or which may contain or which may conceal filthy deposits. Section 521.12A1. And it requires all owners or occupants of any lot or parcel of land within the city to periodically cut and destroy all noxious or harmful weeds and vines growing upon such lot or parcel of land. Section 521.12B. Whereas Section 521.17 defines weeds as all grasses, vegetation, and noxious weeds other than trees or shrubs, and prohibits any person owning, leasing, or renting having care of or being in possession of land within the city from permitting the growth of grass and weeds to a height in excess of 12 inches on that land. However, this overly broad definition of noxious or harmful vegetation and the requirement to cut and destroy such vegetation unduly and unnecessarily impinges upon a property owner, tenant, or lessee's right to quiet enjoyment of land in violation of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Section 16 of the Ohio Constitution. But beyond the constitutional infirmity of the existing ordinances, it is simply bad policy and criminalizes legitimate efforts to provide food and habitat to insect and animal populations under ever-increasing pressure from land development, clearing of natural habitat, and use of harmful pesticides and overuse of fertilizer. Insect, bird, and wildlife populations are plummeting as a result of human activity, pollution, and habitat destruction. Efforts to provide habitat should be increased, and in fact, over 20 states, including Ohio, across the country, have adopted some form of measures to protect and support backyard habitats. With lawns comprising 1/3 of the country's 135 million acres of residential landscapes, increased protection of native flora and fauna could help stem the tide of losses to insect and animal populations, including pollinators, absolutely essential to our agricultural production and in essence, our very existence. Unfortunately, the proposed amendment serves only to even further damage a fragile environment already under siege. If the City of Chiillicothe believes it is necessary to codify language to prevent the creation of a public nuisance in property within the city, I would encourage the council to enact ordinances to address legitimate concerns for public safety, but the existing ordinances and the proposed amendment do not. Thank you.
My name's the Reverend Terry Williams. I reside at 47.5 East Main Street here in the city. And I don't have a particular position on the bees exactly. I am concerned, however, about consistency in your process. We've heard quite a few people talk about this first piece of legislation and ask, why are you taking it from 12 inches to 6 inches? What's the concern about this? And people concerned about bee habitat. Okay. Well, we got this request today, this assignment request from Dr. Henderson about the idea of turning the Tiffin property into a temporary nature preserve. And I got reading, and it looks like the plan might be to mow around the 5.5 acres, but to let the middle of it just grow up as high as you like. I see in here that it could be neat to see a prairie begin to take shape. I'm a little frustrated at that because there is now this idea that you're going to vote for this first piece of legislation tonight that's going to tell citizens in the city, oh, you better keep your grass down to 6 inches. But somebody who's on that Tiffin property who shares a fence line is going to have to mow theirs to 6 inches while their backyard that is owned by the city just grows up high as a kite. And, from the reasoning that's in this committee request, the whole purpose is we're going to save some money in mowing. I think it's really kind of a bad policy that we would force members of the city, right, folk who are not in city government but who just own in the city, to have a certain standard, but then the city can just do as they please. If we have a policy that it's good to have this nature habitat, well, let's take a look at all the places we could have that habitat around. Surely that 6 to 12 inches that, covers people's ground could be much better used all across the city instead of just 5.5 acres. But I think it's a consistency issue if you're going to come here tonight and you're going to vote to tell everybody in the city you've got to cut your grass to 6 inches, and then you're going to entertain the idea that you're going to have a nature preserve in the middle of a residential area for 5.5 acres. Just a thought. It's really not hard to vote no on that first measure or send it back to committee or take a look at how you could be a little more consistent. But I'm going to be very interested to see how y'all vote on that first measure and then how you vote on that next measure that might or might not come in front.
Terry, at the moment, your question is moot because there's been no committee meeting about this. This was brought to my attention by a citizen. So I'm following through with something that was brought to me by a citizen.
We'll now move on to old business. Does anyone have any old business they would like to bring up this evening?
President Geringer, I would like to ask Law Director Villarreal if she has prepared the update on the city's litigation that we requested at our last regular meeting.
We did prepare that. I was told you were going to be absent this evening due to a death in your family, which I'm sorry for that. I was told you were not going to be here, so we've moved that until the next meeting to make sure that you would be in attendance. But I do have that with me.
Any additional items at this time? Not seeing any. Participation in correspondence received by the clerk.
Thank you, President Geringer. Mr. White, would your reading of your email suffice, or would you like me to? Okay, thank you. Okay, sure. So other than Mr. White's correspondence, I received an email from a Mr. and Mrs. Kevin and Nicole Wagner about 2 properties on Irvin Avenue, abandoned properties and things of that nature. And then my next piece of correspondence was from the Ethics Commission, which they contacted me late last year just for updates on council addresses and terms. So they sent me back the final draft, and I'll be signing that and returning it. So thank you.
Now to new business. Any items that need to be brought up for new business at this time?
Did everybody file their ethics report? If not, make sure you do that.
On item number 3, an ordinance amending section 151.02 of the codified ordinances of the city of Chiillicothe, Ohio, titled Court Personnel, I would like to make a motion to amend to adding emergency language to that, please.
Motion by Ms. Preston, seconded by Ms. Henderson. Roll call on the motion to add emergency language to item number 3 on the agenda this evening.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
That motion passes. Emergency language has been added to item number 3.
Council President, at this time, if it's appropriate, I would also like to make a motion on agenda item number 4. As already mentioned a couple times, there was an error on the date in section 1, so I'd like to make a motion to amend section 1 of the ordinance to reflect the change of date from 2021 to 2022.
Motion by Mr. Tony Phillips, seconded by Mr. Prohl. Roll call on the motion to amend the date on item number 4 on tonight's agenda.
Henderson,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Prohl,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Motion to amend passes. From there, we'll move on to our legislation. We have 6 items on our agenda this evening. Ms. Moss, whenever you're ready, please start with item number 1.
Thank you, President Geringer. Item number 1 is the third reading of an ordinance amending section 521.17A, titled Maximum Height of Grass and Weeds of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Chiillicothe, and declaring an emergency.
Roll call on this ordinance.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Brown,
Abstain.
Preston,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Prohl.
No.
Ordinance passes. Item number 2.
Item number 2 is the first
Correction, ordinance does not pass. Item number 2.
Item number 2 is the first reading of a resolution granting use of a certain portion of 2nd Street to the Buck 50 Inc. from April 20th, 2023 through April 22nd, 2023 for its annual Buck 50 relay race.
This item will move to our next agenda, item number 3.
Item number 3 is the first reading of an ordinance amending section 151.02 of the codified ordinances of the City of Chiillicothe, Ohio, titled Court Personnel, and declaring an emergency.
President Geringer.
Yes, Ms. Preston.
At this time, I would like to make a motion to waive the 3-read rule on this item.
Motion by Ms. Preston, seconded by Ms. Henderson to waive the 3-read rule. Roll call on the motion.
Nickerson.
Yes.
Henderson.
Yes.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Motion passes. Roll call on the ordinance.
Henderson.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Nickerson.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
The ordinance passes. Item number 4.
Item number 4 is the first reading of an ordinance appropriating $1,764,483.59 for the purpose of continuing the handling of brought forward purchase orders from the year 2022 and other brought forward amounts to be put on the books of the City of Chiillicothe, Ohio for the year ending December 31, 2023 and declaring an emergency.
President Geringer, at
Yes.
this time, I would like to make a motion to waive the 3-read rule.
Motion by Mr. Tony Phillips, seconded by Mr. Greg Phillips. Roll call on the motion to waive the 3-read rule.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Henderson.
Yes.
Nickerson.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Motion passes. Roll call on the ordinance.
Nickerson.
Yes.
Henderson.
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Ordinance passes. Item number 5.
Item number 5 is the first reading of an ordinance reappropriating funds that were appropriated in the 2022 budget and not yet spent or encumbered for special projects or purchases at the end of 2022 and declaring an emergency.
Council President, I would like to make a motion to waive the 3-read rule on this agenda item. Thank you.
Motion by Mr. Tony Phillips, seconded by Mr. Greg Phillips. Roll call on the motion to waive the 3-read rule.
Brown.
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Henderson.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Nickerson.
Yes.
Motion passes. Roll call on the ordinance.
Henderson.
Yes.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Nickerson.
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Ordinance passes. Item number 6.
Council President, I would like to motion for council to waive the 3-read rule.
Motion by Mr. Brown to waive the 3-read rule, seconded by Mr. Prohl. Roll call on the motion.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Anthony Phillips.
Yes.
Prohl.
Yes.
Nickerson.
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Henderson.
Yes.
Preston.
Yes.
Motion passes. Roll call on the ordinance.
Item number 6 is the first reading of an ordinance authorizing the hiring of a temporary law director clerk in the law director's office and declaring an emergency.
Roll call on the ordinance.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Prohl,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Greg Phillips.
Yes.
Ordinance passes. Are there any additional items to bring up at this time? If not, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Motion by Mr. Brown, seconded by Ms. Henderson. Roll call on that motion.
Prohl,
Yes.
Preston,
Yes.
Henderson,
Yes.
Greg Phillips,
Yes.
Nickerson,
Yes.
Anthony Phillips,
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
That's okay. Motion passes. Have a great evening.